discussing ethics as it relates to management and corporate social responsibility. Determining what is right can be really difficult for managers a lot of times. We've discussed this in class that sometimes ethics, it's harder to come by and harder to implement than we think. Thus, ethics has always been a concern. Recent widespread moral lapses and corporate financial scandals, however, bring the topic to the forefront and pressure managers in large and small companies alike to put ethics near the top of their priorities list. Um, Corporations are rushing really to adopt stringent codes of ethics, strengthen their ethical and legal safeguards, and develop socially responsible policies. There was a poll that found out that 79% of the respondents believe that questionable business practices are widespread. So, not a lot of confidence in our businesses within our society. Fewer than one third um, also thought that most CEOs were honest. So that's a small amount that actually think that they're honest. So that's saying many people think that most CEOs are really dishonest, which I don't know. That's a little creepy and scary to me. But more than 20% of U.S. employees surveyed reported having firsthand knowledge of managers making false or misleading promises to their customers, discriminating in hiring or promotions, and violating employee rights. Surprise, surprise. We've talked about this a lot in our class discussions so far. And a number of companies have begun actually tying managers' pay to ethical factors such as how well they treat their employees or how effectively they live up to their stated corporate values. So, with that said, our objectives for this week are to define ethics and explain how ethical behavior relates to the behavior being governed by law and that of free choice. So, ethics is difficult to define in a precise way, but we are going to try to get a little bit of clarity on this topic this week. We're also going to look at the utilitarian and individualism and moral rights approaches for evaluating ethical behavior. Also, we're going to look at how both individual and organizational factors shape ethical decision making. Then we're going to move into corporate responsibility. And we're going to end with discussing stakeholders, the importance of stakeholders, and identifying their value and their place within organizations. And so that's what we're going to do for our discussion and learning this week. So let's get with it. Let's have some fun with learning this topic. So, ethics. Ethics is defined as a code of moral principles and values that govern the behaviors of a person or group with respect to what's right or wrong. It's a little different. We all have our personal ethics. We all have our personal beliefs and values that shape our everyday lives. Well, companies have their set of ethics as well. So ethics set standards as to what is good or bad in conduct and decision making within organizations. Ethics also deal with internal values that are part of corporate culture and shape decisions concerning social responsibility with respect to the external environment. Ethics also indicate how a person should behave to avoid doing harm to another person. And the essential problem, really, in dealing with ethical issues and solving moral dilemmas is that there are no absolute or indisputable rules or principles that can be developed really to decide whether an action is ethical or unethical. So it's a lot of gray area when we're talking about ethics and that topic of ethics. So, human behavior actually falls into three domains. First, we have our codified law. Codified law are the values and standards that are written into our legal system. They are our laws, right? They're written for our country, for our state, and they are enforceable in courts. So it's black and white. This is the law. If you break it, you will go to jail or get in trouble or something, right? Lawmakers have ruled that people and corporations must behave in a certain way. Bottom line, such as for our society, such as licensing or paying taxes, we are all familiar with. Um, and then the second domain are ethics, right? So ethics lies between the domains of codified law and free choice. It actually has no specific laws, but they do have standards of conduct that are based on shared principles and values about moral conduct. This is what guide our individual or company sort of politics. Because our ethical standards are not codified, disagreements and dilemmas about proper behavior occur over and over and over again because there's so much gray area and people all think differently and they have their own perspectives as to what's right or wrong or what should be done or what shouldn't be done. Then we move into our third domain of free choice. Free choice pertains to the behavior about which law has no say, right? It's our freedom, and for which an individual or organization enjoys complete freedom. So we have a lot of that. We have a lot of areas where we do have free choice to make decisions, such as hiring and firing someone. There's no law that we have to hire a certain person or fire someone. So we have free choice. So an ethical dilemma arises in a situation concerning right or wrong when values are in conflict and right and wrong cannot be clearly defined. So the individual who must make an ethical choice in an organization is actually the moral agent, and it can get a little muddy there. So several ethical dilemmas are presented that may be faced by managers, as well as special hypothetical dilemma being used by scientists to human morality studies. So in Time magazine, there was a poll, another poll, right? 97% of the respondents said that they could throw a switch that would result in saving 5 people, but would almost certainly kill one person. Wow. But only 42% said that they could actually push the one person to his death. Huh. That's very interesting. So, what this means is if you could save 5 people, but would certainly kill one, um, what would you do if there was a situation? So 97% of those people said that they would probably save the 5 people. 42% said that they would push the person to their death. It was a weird study, a weird poll within Time magazine. So, thus, that's an ethical dilemma. It's a hypothetical. It was used by scientists to study human morality, just to say what are your thoughts? What would you do? Very interesting. I don't know what I would do in that situation, but I'd want to save everybody. Probably close my eyes and make a decision. So let's move on to our criteria for ethical decision making. So there's a strategy in place for managers faced with making tough ethical choices. So thank goodness. And this is called a normative strategy. And it's based on certain norms and values to guide managers in their decision making. So normative ethics is based on norms and values, and there are 4 normative approaches, as you can see here, these 4 approaches that describe values for guiding the ethical decision makings for managers. So first is our utilitarian approach. And utilitarian approach holds that moral behavior produces the greatest good for the greatest number. So the decision maker or the manager is expected to consider the effect of each decision alternative on all parties and select the one that will optimize the benefits for the greatest number of people. And this is what our utilitarian approach states. And so If I'm taking this approach, my thought is, I'm going to do whatever is best for the greater good. Next is our individualism approach. It contends that acts are moral when they promote the individual's best long term interests. So, individualism is believed to lead to honesty and integrity because that works best in the long run. Because individualism is easily misinterpreted to support immediate self-gain, it's not as popular in a highly organized and group-oriented society of today. Next, we move into our moral rights approach. This approach asserts that human beings have fundamental rights that cannot be taken away by an individual's decision. So, an ethically correct decision is one that best maintains the rights of those people affected by it. So, six moral rights should be considered during decision making. And these moral rights are the right of free consent, is the first moral right. Individuals are treated only as they knowingly and freely consent to be treated. The next is right to privacy. Individuals can choose to do as they please away from work and have control of information of their private lives. So this would bring up the controversy of Facebook. If companies are allowed to hire or fire us based on our Facebook profiles, or utilize our Facebook and social media profiles as a key decision making and hiring people. So that would challenge that, wouldn't it now? Next is the right of freedom of conscience. This states that individuals may refrain from carrying out any order that violates their moral or religious norms. We're familiar with this. For example, if I am of the Muslim faith and have to, or feel like I need to wear head garb and that sort of thing, my thoughts are that these are my morals and I should be able to do so. Because anything other than that would violate these norms, right? The next is the right of free speech, freedom of speech. So individuals may criticize truthfully the ethics or legality and actions of others. This falls under freedom of speech. Some people take this one a little bit too far, but nonetheless, it's one of the six moral rights, and actually is written in our Constitution. The fifth one is the right to due process. And this one, what this means is that individuals have a right to an impartial hearing and fair treatment. And finally, the right to life and safety. Individuals have a right to live without endangerment or violation to their health and their safety. And so these are our more examples of our moral rights approach to ethical decision making. And finally and last is our justice approach. And what this holds is that moral decisions must be based on standards of equity, fairness, and impartiality. That's what our justice approach states. So, a manager's ethical choices, ethical and unethical business practices, really they usually reflect the values, the attitudes, beliefs, and behavior and patterns of an organizational culture. And so, ethics is as much an organizational issue a lot of times as it is a personal issue. And so, the manager brings specific personality and behavioral traits to the job. Personal needs, family influence, and religious background all shape a manager's value system. Personality characteristics such as ego strength, self-confidence, and a strong sense of independence may enable managers to make ethical choices despite personal risks. So the manager's level or stage of moral development is an important personal trait really in making ethical decisions. Management, they actually, and companies in general, they have an obligation really to make choices and take actions that will contribute to the welfare and the interests of society as well as the organization. So, you're in an organization, you start a business, you exist, but you do have an obligation to welfare of society and the interest of others. And so this is called corporate social responsibility. Corporate social responsibility can be a difficult concept to grasp because people have different beliefs as to which actions will actually improve society's welfare. So, stakeholders um, are actually people that have something to lose or gain based on the actions of a company. So, the definition of a stakeholder is any group within or outside of an organization that actually has a stake, something to gain or lose in an organization's performance. Each stakeholder actually has a different criteria of responsiveness because it has a different interest in the organization. So, as a student, you are actually a stakeholder of Rasmussen College. As an employee, I'm a stakeholder, right? So if something happened to the college, I lose my job, I'm miserable, I'm crying, blah, and I'm broke. So um, you hold a stake because you are a recipient of a product, basically, right? And that's education. But there are other stakeholders. For example, for us, we have our advisory board members, and so these are the companies, right, who we are saying we're going to teach what's necessary to graduate students that are going to be able to contribute to an organization. Um, Other stakeholders in general can include customers and communities. Customers, a lot of people get confused by this, but I like to use the Krispy Kreme analogy because I'm pretty mad that there are no more Krispy Kremes in Illinois. I was the biggest stakeholder because it was my favorite. I'm a donut lover and I love Krispy Kreme way, way, way more than I do Dunkin' Donuts. Krispy Kreme was the best donut ever, and when they left and shut down the last one, I was quite miserable, and they're harder to get. And so, yes, I am a stakeholder, and customers are stakeholders. But other examples were creditors, non-governmental organizations, research institutes, health agencies, government suppliers, basically anybody who has something to gain or lose if something goes wrong with the company. Actually, an organization's performance really affects stakeholders, and so socially responsible organizations try to pay attention to all of their stakeholders who are affected by their actions because they understand this. They understand this concept, and they understand that their actions have consequences and will affect many. Stakeholders can also have a tremendous effect on the organization's performance and success. So today, special interest groups continue to be one of the largest primary um, stakeholder concerns that companies face. Environmental responsibility has also become a primary issue as both business and the public acknowledge the damage that has been done to our natural environment. So, they part of being socially responsible is just making sure, like, if I'm a factory, that I'm not really polluting or causing harm to the environment. So let's talk about sustainability a little bit. Sustainability refers to economic development that generates wealth and meets the needs of the current generation while saving the environment so future generations can meet their needs as well. So, in this philosophy, managers weave environmental and social concerns into every strategic decision. They revise policies and procedures to support sustainability efforts and to measure their progress toward their sustainability goals. Organizations actually are embracing the philosophy of sustainability directly, mainly because of their own environmental concerns, but also because of the growing clout of environmental activists. So companies are finding that they can attract more young MBAs and find innovative ways to create wealth while at the same time preserving natural resources. So, Um, this leads into ethics and codes of ethics and policies and structures developed by companies. And so a code of ethics is a formal statement, and this is not to be confused with the mission statement because they're very, very different. A code of ethics is actually a formal statement of the company's values concerning ethics and social issues. It communicates to employees what the company stand for. A code of ethics tend to exist in two types, and I tell all of my students and anybody really, read if you want to know what a company is about, ask to see their code of ethics or read their code of ethics. See how well it's defined. But the two types are principle-based statements. These are designed to affect corporate culture. They define fundamental values, company responsibilities, the quality of their products, and the treatment of their employees. So if it's a principle-based code of ethics, it will have those elements to it. Values. We as a company, we take responsibility in X, Y, and Z. We uphold the best quality in our products, and we treat our employees very well. The second one type of code of ethics statement is a policy-based statement. A policy based code of ethics outlines the procedures to be used in a specific ethical situation, such as marketing or procedures in event of a conflict of interest or observance of laws and proprietary information, equal opportunities, etc., etc. So, by offering guidelines for ethical questions, a code of ethics gives employees the responsibility and the right to really maintain an organization's ethical climate. Ethical structures represent the various systems, positions, and programs a company can undertake in order to implement ethical behaviors. For example, an ethics committee, which, they're just a group of executives appointed to oversee the organization's ethics, um, or a chief ethics officer, which is an executive who oversees all aspects of ethics and legal compliance. Or another type of structure is ethics training, which are many of us are familiar with, which are programs to help employees deal with ethical questions and translate the values stated in the code of ethics into everyday behaviors. Then there's whistleblowing. Whistleblowing is the disclosure, and in order to whistleblow, you have to be an employee of the company. But it is the disclosure by an employee of legal, immoral, or illegitimate practices by an organization. So if I work for the organization and I tell on them or call them into the government or whatever compliance, then I am considered to be a whistleblower, aka maybe snitch. Some firms have instituted innovative programs and confidentiality hotlines to encourage and support internal whistleblowing. I have my thoughts about that. But companies must view whistleblowing as a benefit to the company and make dedicated efforts actually to protect their whistleblowers for this practice to be effective ethical safeguard. Um, that's what's supposed to happen. A lot of times it's not what actually happens, but this is what's supposed to be. I come from, you remember, the pharmaceutical industry, and whistleblowing was actually quite frequent, or quite, I don't know, it was done a lot. Back when I was working in pharma, I saw it all the time because there's such stringent government guidelines as it relates to the pharmaceutical industry. So this is something that I saw often, unfortunately, when I worked in pharma. So most managers now, to wrap this up, most managers now realize that paying attention to ethics and social responsibility is as much of a business issue as paying attention to cost, paying attention to profits and growth. Managers are often concerned about whether good citizenship will hurt their performance. And so studies have generally found that there is a positive relationship between social responsibility and financial performance. These studies actually provide an indication that use the use of resources for ethics and social responsibility does not hurt companies. And so companies are making an effort really to measure the non financial factors that create value. People really prefer to work for companies that demonstrate a high level of ethics and social responsibility. And so, although doing the right thing may not always be profitable in the short run, it may create a competitive advantage by developing a level of trust that money actually can't buy. So, it really, really pays all in all to be ethical for a company and as individuals.